Ladies and gentlemen, this is El Cochino, Tom Lawler, and I'd like to welcome you to the podcast that puts the lotion on its own skin, LuchaWorld. Bitchin'.
Welcome everyone to LuchaWorld Podcast episode number 93. Fredo Esparza here. Lots of news to talk about this week, from El Mesias leaving AAA, CMLL's upcoming Copa Nuevos Valores tournament, a bunch of matches that recently made their way to YouTube, really. You know, from the indies like Keyra versus Princesa Azul, 5-man match from the Mexa Wrestling Show. Aramis versus Nero Casas from Lucha Meme Show finally made it onto to YouTube about 2 weeks later from when Danny had mentioned it. Actually, a week later from when Danny had mentioned it would be up, as well as a couple of other matches that were pretty good that made their way onto YouTube. We'll also talk about the New Japan show in Long Beach, Dragon Lee, Rey Mysterio, MLW getting their own TV show on the BN Sports channel. All that is coming up, but the big news that we opened the show with, of course, is the biggest return in Lucha Libre of 2018. She's been gone for a long time. I know many of you listeners missed watching her matches. And of course, I am talking about Estrellita. She is back. I know everybody listening is very excited. They're thrilled. I could already hear you guys cheering on, waiting in anticipation to see her return to CMLL rings. Of course, there are two things that all of us look forward to when Estrellita is in a CMLL ring. The first, what outfit is she going to wear? And the second, what possible risk or dangers there will be within her match, because we all know that she gets that little burst of energy, goes really fast. It does a bunch of arm drags. Then she decides she's got to do an arm drag off the top rope or a tope to the outside, and you know something's gonna happen. Hopefully it doesn't end up being anything horribly bad, but usually. I think that might have been one of the reasons that she hasn't been around also, because she had, I think the last time I saw her wrestle, she had that one, I think it might have been that dive or an arm drag that she did that. I know I saw her once do a tope and she tried to do a plancha to the outside, and I think one of the other girls didn't catch her, so she landed on the floor. And then there was something else with an arm drag at one point where she missed it and fell off of the second rope or something. But, you know, she's back. She'll be making her return for the Arena Coliseo 75th anniversary show. Not a lot to that show. They mentioned they're going to be posting, they're going to air it on channel 52 MX. And I think the only person I know that actually gets that channel is the Cubs fan, which is a good thing, because if they air it, at least we'll get to maybe watch that, depending on the matches they had. They didn't really announce anything that interesting. The two Legends matches, they decided to have two tag matches, and Nero Casas has to team up with Mascareno dos Mil, so that already is unless you really want to watch Nero Casas and then just skip through Mascareno dos Mil's portion of the matches. But it looks like a pretty good card. Maybe they'll post it on YouTube, who knows. That weekend, I think most people are going to be watching other things early on. I know I'm definitely going to try to watch the Impact versus Lucha Underground show. But yeah, Estrellita's back to strengthen that CMLL women's roster. I had to say that, you know. We'll be talking about women's wrestling again I'm going to do a Lucha Clasica segment towards the end of the show. Something I kind of want to try out just to add, because I get tired of doing those previews. That's like an extra hour of working on podcasts that I really just want to at least do the 2 or 3 podcasts that I do, and that's about all I don't want to spend more time editing than I already do. So really the big news since we last did the last podcast was Mesias officially announcing that he had left AAA. The last time we did the podcast, we talked about the Rey Reyes match where he waved goodbye after losing to La Parca in the Reyes semifinal match. And Dorian Roldan, after that match, was asked what was going by the Mas Lucha crew, what was going on with El Mesias. Turns out, well, he actually said that he just figured he was mad about losing, but apparently Dorian was lying because he pretty much already knew at that point that El Mesias had quit. Although El Mesias said that he got a feeling from AAA that they thought he was only joking, and he said that day before the match at Rey de Reyes, he told Vampiro and others in AAA that he was done with the promotion, and so that's why he waved goodbye. He was basically saying he was gone. The reasons that he decided to leave: he felt disrespected by AAA, talked about how the last 4 years of his career there was nothing going on. The last year he spent most of it injured. He actually had double knee surgery, I think what was it? I think late last year, but he had wrestled injured. He mentioned he had wrestled injured from June 2017 through October 2017. At the end of he said he had to fulfill the commitments with because AAA because of that AAA Japan tour. So he fought on. He brought up how that Pagano match was supposed to be a lucha extrema. They switched it around on them the day of the show, and it turned out to be really horrible. I think he actually admitted that it was a really bad match. So in talking about what he thought about the last 4 years of his career in AAA, he mentioned how a lot of people were asking why he wouldn't leave, because he had seen so many guys leave, and he always wondered why. He saw Rey Fenix, Pentagon, Conan, Taya, Daga, so many people leaving AAA, and he didn't really understand why. He didn't really have I don't think he really went out of his way to ask or anything, but he just figured it was just part of business, and he basically brought up how he felt he was very stubborn in thinking that AAA would improve. And he figured out as the years went on that the promotion just kept getting worse and worse. And if you see the last year of AAA, they've gotten much worse. I mean, not just from talent leaving, but talent being very upset at the promotion, and being very public about it. Rey Fenix comparing working to AAA to slavery. Penta hasn't been as harsh about it. Garza Jr. has been. Early on when he had left, he talked about how horrible it was working there. Taya also talked about how they handled her whole situation at the end. So yeah, he basically felt he was disrespected. Came back from surgery, and the first thing they told him he was going to lose in the first match back. And of course it was to La Parca. He basically said he had no problems losing to La Parca, but he didn't feel that it was right that he had this big return to AAA, and they have him lose. And that was basically the straw, that very end of it. He's already getting independent bookings. He has a match scheduled against Cibernetico, which actually was a pretty good feud early on in his early run in AAA. But I mean, that was 12, 13 years ago. Cibernetico's gotten actually worse. Although, Cibernetico didn't look that bad in CMLL, so I can't hate on him too much. He said he's open to wrestle anywhere. He was asked about Lucha Underground. He said, as far as he was concerned, that he would probably continue with Lucha Underground because he's seen other guys who left AAA. And I think right now of the Lucha Underground roster, there's probably only 5 or 6 AAA regulars that are part of Lucha Underground. And I think everybody else has either left AAA or were never part of AAA because they were American, ex-WWE guys or indie wrestlers from the US. He was asked about the rights to his name. He brought up how he's used the Ricky Banderas El Mesias name since 1998, and how in 2011 he received he received a letter from AAA mentioning that they had trademarked his name, El Mesias. In some form, they had trademarked the El Mesias name, and he brought up how he never consented or gave authorization for that to happen. But at that time, I think this was around the time Lucha Libre USA was starting, because that's the first time the Lucha Libre USA basically was the promotion that started before Lucha Underground that was supposedly going to work with AAA. That fell apart immediately and ended up resulting in Lucha Libre USA using a lot of guys who weren't in who were independents, or they had like guys like Marco Corleone who had left AAA. I can't remember if he was still with AAA at the time that they had started, but he was already gone at that point and was working for Lucha Libre USA. I think they used Shane Helms also. Oriental was on that. By the Oriental told Curtin and myself that was probably his the promotion that took care of him the best. So, as short-lived as it was, they did take care of their of talent. Obviously, the opposite of what AAA has done. So at that time, anyways, back to the whole name thing. At that time, when AAA was going to work with Lucha Libre USA, if you go back and look at the trademarks, the trademark registration site, you'll find that they trademarked like names like Cibernetico, Dr. Wagner Jr., a bunch of guys that were part of the promotion at that time. And a lot of the guys didn't know about it at that time. They found out about it years later when they actually renewed the trademarks, or actually tried to get more when they started working with Lucha Underground. When they started Lucha Underground. So he said that he has Mesias said that he has the paperwork to prove that he does own the name, and he doesn't think there's going to be an issue. Although he's willing to fight for the name and fight for his for whatever he has to do to stop Dorian Roldan from blocking him from getting booked by other promoters. Mesias said that his last conversation with Dorian was that Dorian threatened him and told him that he was going to block him, do his best to block him from working for Lucha Underground and for other promoters across Mexico and probably in the U.S. and other parts of the world, because they've done that with other guys like Rey Fenix and Pentagon. They haven't done that with they've done that mostly with the guys based out of Mexico, and not with like I don't think I've heard anything from Ty or anybody like that who's had those issues. So that's where Mesias is at right now. He's a big loss for the promotion, not just because he's a big name. I think his match quality had really dipped in the last 4 years, mostly because of injuries. I think he had an arm injury at one point, and then of course the knee injuries. But his quality had dipped, but he still had a star. He was a star name. Had value, and AAA right now doesn't have a lot of that. I mean, they're booking promoters, independent promoters who run AAA house shows, are booking Dave the Clown in main events. I mean, that tells you how bad AAA is right now, where they can't. They at one point they were able to split crews and give promoters like a really good raw lineup, and now it's like all these like Dave the Clown, the Llave a la Gloria guys who are good. Most of them have been good, but that's a lot of like, they're not really names. Big Mommy and Niño Hamburguesa working like semi-main events or fourth matches on some of these house shows. It's gotten pretty bad for AAA, and they lose a guy who has that type of name. The other thing is like the perception that they have that they're really just falling apart, and it's pretty bad right now. The other news from AAA is Vampiro mentioned that Verano de Escándalo would be happening in Monterrey this year, and he also brought up that one of the matches might include a retirement match for Vampiro. He said that in between talking about how dangerous it is to be in Monterrey, because you could be killed by the cartel or kidnapped, or who knows what else could possibly happen to you driving through Monterrey. A lot of ramblings from Vampiro in that Facebook post. The last AAA TV taping, which aired on Twitch, the big news out of that was Rey Scorpion and Tejano Jr. Winning the AAA World Tag Team Championships. That's the one thing I was talking about this off air with Dylan and Microman Fever on Lucha Talk, that you look at, because I was telling him that Cubs fan posted this he tweeted out the current AAA champions, and the people holding the titles were actually pretty good wrestlers. So they still have the possibilities of a pretty good roster, but it's basically about maybe like 20 or 30, maybe like max 25, And then there's a lot of people where you're just like, they're like Dave the Clown. Like I said, Dave the Clown, Big Mommy. They don't really have a women's division right now. They haven't had one in a while because it's basically just like 3 or 4 women, and then, someone they would bring in like from Impact or the Independents. But yeah, they have Rey Escorpion Tejano Jr. as a pretty interesting World Tag Team Championship team, and their first challengers to those titles are Aerostar and Drago. So we should actually get a pretty good match out of that. I think that's something that AAA really needs. But the bad thing is, like, they'll somehow screw it up, and the rest of the card will just be so difficult to watch. A lot of people who were watching the last 3 shows were talking about how painful these shows were, and the Sunday show was actually what they said was the better one, the best of the 3. But it's like it was still kind of difficult to watch. That's the AAA news. And now we get to talk about CMLL. And it wouldn't be a CMLL conversation if we didn't have a tournament to talk about. And fortunately, we have another tournament to talk about this week. As CMLL will hold over the next 3 weeks, every Tuesday actually, CMLL's Copa Nuevos Valores. They announced the 16 participants, but somehow, as I mentioned earlier, Astral made the list. I guess he's a last minute substitution for the Group 1 that's going to start up on this upcoming Tuesday. The 16 participants that were announced initially were Templario, Audaz, Magia Blanca, Maquiavelo, Yago, Príncipe Daniel from Guadalajara, Reiko from Guadalajara, Fugaz from Guadalajara, Super Astro Jr., El Coyote, Graco, or Graco, whatever you want to call him, Sangre Imperial, George Quebrada, Retro, Flyer, Príncipe Diamante, and of course the late replacement Astral. I was trying to figure out more or less who Astral replaced, and I'm guessing it's either Príncipe Diamante or Magia Blanca, because they announced the first 8 participants, the first block of the Copa Nuevos Valores for this upcoming Tuesday, and the first 8 would be Yago, Super Astro Jr., El Coyote, Sangre Imperial, George Quebrada, Retro, Flyer, and Astral. So I guess we will know next week who got kicked off of this. I have a weird feeling Magia Blanca was the one that got kicked off because he had this really horrible performance this past Friday, and he looked so bad. I'm guessing that it was difficult. It would have been difficult to not see his match. Even like the CMLL programming department that doesn't watch most of their shows probably heard about it and realized that maybe he shouldn't be in it. But who knows? Maybe it's somebody else that got hurt. George Quebrada mentioned that the Guadalajara guys would be on the show. So the most interesting thing out of all this is that I think everyone thought that Templario versus Audaz was going to be the no-brainer final. But CMLL usually does two tournaments for the young guys. Sometimes they do 3 if they do En Busca de un Ídolo. But they use the two that they definitely have is this singles tournament. Although they just started doing this one also, but and the Gran Alternativa, the tag team tournament where they have the veteran with the youngster, or sometimes they have the old guy teaming up with the youngster. I think they've done that a few times. I think Okumura did it once, and somebody else did it where they were older than their veteran. But this so Templario and Audaz are in the same in group 2, so we're not going to get that as a final. I think everybody's trying to figure out of this group who is possibly going to be in the final. I kind of have a feeling Flyer might be the favorite right now. I don't think Sangre Imperial has a shot. Coyote's pretty good, but I don't think he has a shot either. Retro, I don't think he's that good from what I've seen. Yago's good, but I don't think they're going to elevate him that quickly. George Quebrada, he was really good in the interview on Informa. So if he's anywhere as good in the ring as he was in the interview. Who knows? Maybe it could be him, but I don't think it's going to be him. I think it comes down to I don't think Astral would be the guy that they would move up just because he's so tiny. Even though he's ripped. I just can't. He just doesn't seem like they could do more with him beyond him being a good mid card technical. I think it comes down to really Super Astro Jr. and Flyer, for me at least. We haven't seen Super Astro Jr. Him and George Cabrera are really the guys that haven't been seen that much. I've heard Super Astro Jr. is pretty good from from people who have seen him on indie shows. But I think Flyer's probably going to be the one that ends up in the final, just because maybe they finally realize that they gotta move him up. Volador Jr. has been praising him more of late, taking his career a little more seriously. So I think Flyer might be the one to move up, and I think it might end up being Flyer and Templario, and maybe Audaz being the one that wins Gran Alternativa. So that means the group block 2 would be Templario, Audaz, Maquiavelo, Príncipe, the Guadalajara guys, Príncipe Daniel, Reiko Fugaz, Graco, and then we either get Magia Blanca or Príncipe Diamante. Maybe neither one. They might actually replace both of the guys. You never know with CMLL. But yeah, I think Templario and Audaz is the clear-cut 2 guys for block 2. But you know, they really tricked us in this one, because I think everybody was just going with Templario and Audaz, who stand out far better than anybody else in this tournament. I like Flyer. I think he's got some potential. I kind of think when CMLL had the tag team final, I think they should have gone with Flyer and Volador Jr. in the final, just to elevate someone. And because honestly, I mean, Valiente, you've pretty much he's already a trios champion, and they pretty much already he's already reached the peak of what he could do. And I think Flyer has a little more where they were a really fun tag team last year in I think it was the Gran Alternativa. And then they never teamed up again, of course. So, you know, it's CMLL. I'm really curious. I really want to see what Super Astro Jr. looks like. That's the one guy in this whole tournament and George Cabrera, because they both seem like they could be in promising talents. Yago's good. I thought Coyote looked pretty good in the past. So yeah, this tournament should be interesting. Something a little different. It's not a tag team tournament, at least. Should be fun. This past Tuesday, a really fun match between Soberano Jr. and Barbaro Cavernario. I thought this was really great. Probably one of the best. I would say it was one of the better matches this year. Had the crowd, really good crowd. I think it's vacation time in Mexico, so they had a really good crowd, a better than usual Tuesday crowd, which means the Friday crowd is probably going to be a lot bigger than it usually is. So we're actually going to get to see the arena again. You know, that's the big CML shows is when you get to see the arena and see how many people are there. You know, it's a good crowd when this is the only match I watched. I don't know how the rest of the matches were, but during this match, the camera guys must have been delighted because they were getting so many women in the crowd, shots of women in the crowd, a lot of foreigners. So that's when you know CML has a good crowd. Really good match. Cavernario really dominated much of the match. Just beat on Soberano Jr. Great job of being a Rudo in this match. Ripped up his mask, ripped up his tights. He ripped up his mask, and then Soberano Jr. got another mask, and that got ripped up also. Really good match. Highly recommend it. You guys watch it. Soberano Jr. ended up winning the match. Really fun. Yeah, I thought this was one of the better matches that from this year. Definitely, everyone should check that out. Had a chance to watch the New Japan show from Long Beach. I think I only missed like about an hour of it. Like somewhere I saw the main event, but like the hour before that, I pretty much just stopped watching it because it was going a little too long for me. And I really liked the Jushin Thunder Liger Will Ospreay match. I thought it was okay, given Ospreay hurt his I think he hurt his ankle or something. Dragon Lee and the actually the Dragon Lee was in an 8-man tag against Los Ingobernables de Japón. I thought that was good also. I thought the show overall was pretty good. What I saw, Dragon Lee told the story on Informa about having the chance to meet Rey Mysterio at this show. he mentioned how when he heard that Rey Mysterio had hurt his bicep, that he was pretty bummed because he realized that Rey Mysterio wouldn't be wrestling Jushin Thunder Liger on the show, so he figured he wasn't going to be on the show. He then realized, once his match finished, he found out that Rey Mysterio had actually made it to the show and was there to cut a promo and promise, as those of you who watched, Rey Mysterio promised he would actually make his New Japan in-ring debut at some point. He threw out challenges to Jushin Thunder Liger, and then Will Ospreay challenged Rey Mysterio, so we might actually get those two matches, which would be really cool. So Dragon Lee said that he went and peeked through the curtain to see if it was true that Rey Mysterio was there, and he was very excited. He was trying to figure out how he could ask him for a photo and stuff. And so Rey Mysterio walked backstage, and the first thing, Dragon Lee ran over to him to like shake his hand, and right before he could say anything, Rey Mysterio told him he was doing well, and told him he had a bright future ahead of him. Dragon Lee said he was just amazed because he had grown up being a big Rey Mysterio fan. Talked about how when he was a kid, he used to save up his allowance. In Mexico, we call in Spanish it's el domingo, because that's when you get your allowance in within most Mexican families. My parents would give me domingos every once in a while. They'd skipped a couple of domingos. I think I should ask for them now that I could use that money right now, or maybe they could contribute it to my Patreon. The $5 was basically my domingo, so maybe they could do that. He said that he would save up his allowance and go buy WWE DVDs because he's a huge Rey Mysterio Jr. fan, and he said he had the chance to meet him, and he said it's amazing how nice and how humble Rey Mysterio is, and he said it's proof that if you remain that way, not just when you're moving up in the business, but when you reach superstardom, if you stay that way, you'll achieve your goals and experience success. Rey Mysterio, I mean, a lot of the guys, I mean, Nero Casas, when we talked to him last year, he was talking about how he had not seen Rey Mysterio in like 10 years or something, and he said he was still the same humble guy that he was when he first met him. I think Casas knew him back when he was like a teenager too, so he's been around him for a long time. The other match that I really liked from the New Japan show was the main event, the Young Bucks versus Golden Lovers. I don't like that name for the team, but it's a good tag team. It was a fun match. Really liked it. I saw a lot of people complain about the acting in certain parts, and it is what it is. I thought it was still fun. I enjoyed it. It's fun. I saw people online like getting upset at people thinking that it was like the greatest tag team. There's some fans who said it was like the greatest tag team match that they've ever seen. And you had a couple of people on Twitter just complain about, if you thought that was the greatest tag team match of all time, maybe you should watch some other stuff from the past. Let people enjoy their moment. Some wrestling fans have not watched wrestling since the 1980s or didn't grow up watching everything. Some of these fans probably just started watching WWE and got into New Japan, and they watched this, and this probably just blew away anything that they've seen in the last 3, 4, 5 years. Let them have their fun. I mean, really, why do you have to and that's the thing about the internet. Well, it's always been the thing with the internet. Everybody's always finding something to complain about and put everyone down. Let them enjoy it. I thought it was a fun match. I would actually say it was one of the better tag matches I've seen. So I don't know what some of the guys who were complaining about it, people saying it were so worked up about it. Because I mean, I thought it was up there. There's been a couple. I think the last couple of years, there's been some pretty good tag team matches. That the Cavernario Volador Ultimo Guerrero Valiente tag match from last year was really good. Also, I think I said that was probably those were my two favorite tag matches of the last 2-3 years. Yeah. So also announced, Dragon Lee was announced for this year's King of the Indies tournament for July 6th. So Dragon Lee is getting a lot of bookings in the U.S. I think he's also possibly coming back for the New Japan show. I think that show is happening around that area also, because in Northern California, that's where the King of Indies is happening also. What else is going on? There was something else I was going to mention about Dragon Lee. RIW. also brought up that they're going to bring in Dragon Lee and Mystico. If you're going to that show and the poster says 3 p.m. start time, you guys got plenty of time to arrive. You don't have to show up at 3 p.m. Yeah, 2 hours late, you'll be fine. You'll make it to that show. I know Rob was at that last show and he brought up how late it started. And I was trying to remember I think I've gone to 2 of his shows. And the last one I went to, he had Goro Maya Jr., Puma, and Tiger. And I could not remember if we actually had to wait 2 hours for the show to start. But now that I think about it, I think we did, because I did 3 interviews with, I interviewed Puma, Tiger, and Goro Maya Jr. And I think I spent like about a half hour talking to Tiger before the show started. And still, when we went back to get our seats, there was still like we still waited for like another half hour. So I think it was maybe like an hour or 90-minute late start. So yeah, that's the problem with a lot of the local lucha promotions. They start so late. Usually I can understand like a half hour, but man, an hour, 90 minutes, 2 hours, that's ridiculous. People have other things to do. You're making it easier for these, and then these promoters complain about people not showing up, Start your shows on time, plan better. Shit. Other news, Garza Jr. and Ultimo Ninja were undergoing medicals with WWE. So there is a possibility that they might actually get offered deals to go to the WWE. I think Garza Jr. has always been somebody that, I think since he did that reality show or that variety show he was doing in Monterrey, I think since that moment when he unmasked, I think everybody thought he should be somebody that WWE should go after. I don't know what his future or Ultimo Ninja's future would be with WWE, but worst case, they get 205 Live, NXT. It takes a while. I mean, it's not like these guys immediately. I think Ronnie Mendoza hasn't even been on any. Like, I think he's mostly been on house shows right now, and I think he's been there for like a year. Same thing with when Sombra, Andrade Cien Almas. I think he spent like almost a year on house shows, and same thing. Grand Metalik spent several months doing that. Although he did the cruiserweight tournament and all that, but yeah, that's that. It's good for them. It beats whatever it beats. It's a guaranteed deal, also. I think, but they're not gonna make what they'll probably make more there than they would in. Actually, I couldn't even say that, because I think the way there's so many independent groups now getting like deals. Like you have Aero Lucha trying to start TV. You have MLW TV, MLW starting on TV also. There's a couple of other promotions that are trying to get backing, trying to get more money involved. So there might be more. It might not be this big difference in what they could make as independents as it would be going to WWE, especially being on lower tiered guys. Like, so, but the reality is, all these guys, their dreams are to be in WWE, and if they call you, you just can't pass that up. As I said, MLW is starting their own TV show. It will be airing on the beIN Sports Network starting on April 20th, 4/20. Surprised Conan isn't part of this new project, given the start date. They mentioned Rey Fenix and Pentagon Jr. would be on the show. They worked out the deal for Pentagon and Rey Fenix through Lucha Underground and AAA. More so Lucha Underground, and I guess AAA kind of like had to like really couldn't. I think part of the deal is that AAA isn't gonna send court any cease and desist letters about using these guys under those names. Although you never know with them, they might actually still do that. So that should be fun another show to watch. Speaking of other promotions trying to start up, Aero Lucha. Last update I have for their crowdfunding venture was I think somewhere between 49 and 50 investors. I think they've already passed the 60,000 mark. I think they're a little over 62,000. So, but you have to remember, one person dropped in 50K. So it's really about 48, 49 people at 12,000, which, for me, if small time promotion type of thing, it'd be kind of cool. But they're more thinking about television, stuff like that. I think the Cubs fan made a point that he thinks it's more of them trying to use this as to sell it to TV networks as a promotion that started as a grassroots, you know, investment opportunity where all these fans are joining in to like make it a, you know, get it started, but they're probably going to fund the majority of it on their own. They're going to fund the television part of it. I have no idea what they're going to do. Like I said, I don't even know if Aero Lucha really is Lucha, because they don't really, their roster, and with all these other promotions starting up, and with WWE showing interest in Lucha and some of these guys, who knows who's going to be on their roster. Even like if you look at I won't mention Lucha Underground spoilers, but if you really want to know spoilers, just go to SoCal Uncensored. You'll find some of the spoilers. But even if you go on Lucha Underground's their most recent spoilers, they had a lot of stuff. They're far fewer luchadors now than there were in the first couple of seasons. So it's becoming a little more difficult to really call these promotions lucha promotions. If you want to go lucha promotions, the lucha promotions are the ones that start 2 hours late, really. If you're looking for those in the US. I had a chance to watch a lot of matches since I didn't watch any AAA. So I watched a lot of good matches. A couple of matches from the Mexa Wrestling show from March 24th. You could find those on the Torta Super Astro YouTube channel. They have this really good interview with Demasiado, who's an Exotico. He was really good. Like, if you want to know what it's like if you want to know the experience of being part of trying to get into CMLL, he basically talks about how he got into training with it and how some of the bad luck he's had within the last year from the earthquake in Mexico, the earthquake that hit Mexico, leading to him not really getting a chance to appear on more CMLL shows, to him dealing with an issue with his face where he was talking about how he became inflamed, and some inflammation on one side, and then all of a sudden that disappeared and it came out on the other side. He could not figure out, doctors could not figure out what was wrong, so he spent some time in his hometown as far as like getting that resolved. And then he talks about suffering an orbital bone break early in the year and just coming back right now and trying to get back in shape and get back into the ring. And he said that he plans on going back to talk to CMLL again, and he hopes to wrestle there. I've only seen little of him, so I can't really give an opinion on how good or how bad he is. But he, just from hearing him talk, he sounds like he's somebody that has really thought this out. He had a great take on women's wrestling about how there's a lot of bad luchadoras in Mexico because his feelings, like a lot of promoters, they just want to bring in all these women. They're not even properly trained, or some of them aren't really that good. And he said that it's really because the guys just want to see they bring these women in because they know some guys just go to the shows to see these women. You know, he used a little bit more of a derogatory term when describing it, and he said, and a lot of these women could always improve, but at the moment that they start, they're not very good. And which leads to my first match that I watched, which I thought was great. Keyra versus Princesa Azul. Princesa Azul, who, for those who aren't familiar with her, is the daughter of Hijo de Anibal, the granddaughter of Anibal. This one match, she already showed more than her dad ever did. I'm not even joking. She was already way better than her dad. And a couple of people, I think Rob mentioned that she's not very good, but Keyra made her look like $1 million. Keyra is amazing. She's awesome. I think she's somebody that I don't know why she's not getting more bookings in the U.S. I've seen her work a lot in Texas and a couple of the smaller groups. I know she worked for Aero Lucha, but she should be somebody that like all these promotions should be trying to get. Yeah, Keyra versus Princesa Azul was really a good match. Kira's just really good. Not just as a luchadora, but I think she's kind of like in that stage that Fabi Apache was about, like in 2004, 2006, somewhere around that time period, where you could make an argument for her being as good as some of the men wrestling at that time. I think Kira's kind of at that level right now also, where I think she's better than. I think she's probably the best female wrestler in Mexico right now. She looked really good in this match. Like I said, if you could, if she could, if this was her doing a miracle and having a good match with Princesa Azul, we're gonna have to get her against some of these other female wrestlers and have them and see if what they could do against her. Maybe she could have like memorable matches. She could have like amazing matches with La Comandante or Sanelli and Seductora and all these other women. Estrellita. You never know. The other really good match that I watched from the show was a 5-way match. Aramis versus Moria, Septimo Dragon, Toxin, and Latigo. The winner would become the number 1 contender to the Crash Cruiserweight title, which is currently held by I think it's held by Astrolux. I was gonna call them Aerolux. What was Aerolux? Aerolux was that the company that was like involved with Impact at one point? That's the Harris Twins thing, wasn't it? Well, the Luchador's Astrolux. But anyways, this match was really good. Aramis was really good in this match. He's somebody that I think he needs. I don't know if he's already gotten his travel visa or whatever he needs to get out to work outside of Mexico, because he's a guy that, I mean, right now he could probably be in Dragon Gate, PWG, all these US indie groups. He's somebody that I think he's the next guy that's going to be the in that Flamita Bandito group of guys where as soon as he gets his visa, he'll be able to, and he's allowed to travel. He's gonna be all over the place. The other guys were pretty good in the match also, but like I said, Aramis looks really good. I mean, he's at a whole nother level. And we talk about Aramis and Keyra, and these are two people who could always possibly go to CMLL or AAA, but I'm glad that they're not, just because they're young, and really those two promotions kind of kill the life out of a lot of their young talent, keeping them not just buried low in the card, but having them do a lot of repetitive matches, having them do a lot of or not even wrestling on shows, like in the case of Dinastia, where he sometimes isn't even on shows. Keyra would be miserable, I think, if she was in CMLL or AAA. I think she might be a little more okay with AAA, but CMLL, just because she'd be doing all those trios matches, I think she'd be a little more miserable with AAA because there's not as much competition. And with CMLL, I think just constantly doing those trios matches would probably kill her enthusiasm. And Aramis, I think if he was in CML, he'd probably be working the good thing, he would be in the Copa Nuevos Valores, but the rest of the time he'd probably be in those opening or second or third matches, facing Cancerbero and Raciel or Camora and Inquisidor, guys like that. In AAA, he probably would be in just those random trios matches low in the card, or those relevos de locura matches. So I think they're doing a lot better on the indie scene. Like I said, if they could get more work outside of Mexico, they would be in high demand. The other match I watched was Aramis versus Negro Casas from the Lucha Meme Show. It took Danny about a week to finally post this. It took him a week after, I think a week that it had already been decided what match it would be. Cubs fan had picked it out. I think it was a week. I think it's been, what has it been, 3 or 4 weeks since this match happened? So it actually was a pretty good match. It was good. Aramis hit this really cool tope at Nero Casas, where they both hit this post that's holding the makeshift rooftop in Coacalco. But yeah, overall, really good match. Casas ended up winning with La Casita. I think he won with La Casita. But after the match, he really put over Aramis, saying he gave him a 10 overall in his performance. I think Nero Casas was doing his own En Busca de un Ídolo. That's really what we should do. That should be Nero Casas' new role. He should wrestle young guys, and at the end of the match, it should be like Nero Casas En Busca de un Ídolo, where he wrestles all the young guys, and then he gives them on a scale of 1 to 10 what he thought their performances were. And then that would be the end of that would be the segment. And then not just in CML, but in indies, he could work against Audaz, maybe work against Robin, and the indies he could work Aramis and Astrolux. Maybe he shows up in IWRG, wrestles. He goes through those students, those teams. They could have him wrestle what was that, Lucha Libre Boom Team, the students, the Phil students, Dr. Cerebro students. Just have him like go against everybody. Like everywhere he goes, it'll be the En Busca de un Ídolo show with host Nero Casas. He'll be the host, the opponent, and the judge. There you go. That's the greatest idea of how to use Nero Casas coming up. The other match I watched this past Sunday's hair match between Ricky Marvin and Dr. Cerebro, I thought it was pretty good. Ricky Marvin sold an arm injury like during the middle portion of the match. Dr. Cerebro went after him really like early on. He controlled most of the match early on, and then Ricky Marvin regained. He ended up winning. I thought it was pretty good. I think you could tell Ricky Marvin's, he's gained some weight. I think if he lost some weight, lost about 15-20 pounds, I think he'd be in more demand. I'm surprised because I don't know, maybe he's not getting asked to work outside of Mexico, outside of Mexico or South America, because I think most of his bookings I've seen, he's wrestled quite a bit in South America and Mexico, but he's not really somebody gets brought into the U.S. And I think he has a name where you would think he would actually get bookings in the U.S. But I think right now it's just the way he kind of looks like Super Crazy in the weight department. If he lost a couple of pounds, I think he'd be in a little more demand. But I thought that was a pretty good match. Flama Azul passed away this past Wednesday. He was a star in Lucha Libre during the 70s and 80s. He held the Mexican national lightweight title from October 30th, 1986, when he beat El Tauro, all the way through April 10th, 1977, when he lost the title to Americo Roca in Monterrey. He had successful title defenses against the likes of Estrella Blanca, Rodolfo Ruiz, and Mario Valenzuela. Speaking of Estrella Blanca, I think I posted one of his, because there were a bunch of Estrella Blancas by the late 80s, and I posted one of his matches, and one of them is actually this. I think it's this guy, because he was a lot older. So after that title he lost his mask in a tag team match, teaming with El Enfermero Segundo against Brazo de Oro and Brazo de Plata on August 22nd, 1982. He would later become part of the Super Libres group. The Super Libres group is basically there were two groups of independents. The independents who worked the El Toreo, and then the other group of independents were called the Super Libres, who would mainly work Pabellon Azteca. And they were basically, a lot of those guys were like the comedy characters, but joined in with a lot of pretty good wrestlers too. He formed a trio with Darth Vader and El Magnifico. Who could forget Darth Vader's amazing run in Lucha Libre? Many of you do not realize that he was not killed off in the Star Wars series. He was actually transitioning his career from being in movies to becoming a luchador. And he had a very successful run in the 80s, post George Lucas movies. Amazing run as part of the Super Libres group. Flama Azul also had a heated rivalry in Pabellon Azteca with Super Muñeco. And I think by that point, I think he retired somewhere in the early 90s, I think. But he passed away this past Wednesday. So I wanted to do something different for this for the podcast, as I mentioned. Since I do the Lucha Clasica podcast for Patreon, and I also do a write-up of Boxy Lucha magazines, or there's a variety of other magazines. I think the next magazine I'm doing is Arena de Boxy Lucha, which is on the cover. It has, I think, El Enfermero on the cover, and it's from 1963. That's going to be the next magazine I write about. But the most recent one, what I wanted to do is like add a little segment into the LuchaWorld podcast where I talk about something that maybe it was written in one of the magazines or was part of one of the most recent Lucha Clasica episodes. And since we talked about Keyra and we talked about the amazing return of Estrellita to the CMLL rings, I thought, what better time to talk about the history of women's wrestling in Mexico? In Mexico City, really, because it's not Mexico. Mexico City. The first matches in Mexico City occurred in 1942 and featured North American women like Mildred Burke, Susan Paul, Betty Garvey, and Mae Young. They actually wrestled 3 times in Arena, Mexico that year. I think it was as part of the September anniversary shows around that time period. They made additional appearances throughout the years in the 1940s, all the way up through 1950. Some of the other women that also included actually Mildred Burke returned, Mae Young, and June Byers would actually work a couple of shows as well. That 1950 was actually the last time they were there, because at that point there was a new rule that was created by the Boxy Lucha Commission in Mexico City, where they were prohibiting women from wrestling in the city. That ban in Mexico City would go on for over 30 years, I think. But there was still women's wrestling in other parts of Mexico. In 1955, Jack O'Brien, along with a few other promoters, brought back women's wrestling in other parts of Mexico. O'Brien actually trained some of the very first Mexican luchadoras, because originally it was mostly North American women that were traveling to Mexico to wrestle in Mexico, while Jack O'Brien started training female wrestlers. And some of the he decided that they should actually have women's wrestling on shows that he was promoting, because he recalled that the women in the 40s that had come in at that time were actually pretty good draws. And I don't think he agreed with the commission, the Mexico City's commission rule of that, of banning them. So he decided to do his, when he would promote outside of Mexico City, he would have a women's match. Some of the first luchadoras were La Dama Enmascarada, La Enfermera de Médico Asesino, Martha La Norteña, and Irma Gonzalez, who would actually become the top female wrestler in Mexico during that time period. Women would continue to wrestle throughout Mexico without stepping into Mexico City. So, I'm not going to go through the whole 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Just want to get to the part of how women's wrestling was banned, for how long, and how it came back. A lot of the women by the 80s, they were actually getting more work. Actually, by the 70s and the 80s, they were getting more work not just in Mexico, but they were working in the U.S. and Japan. You had a lot of the Mexican women like Lola Gonzalez, Irma Gonzalez, La Galáctica, who many of you who follow Lucha would know more as La Pantera Sureña. She used the Galáctica name in All Japan Women. Irma Aguilar, Zuleima, and Chabela Romero. They were all traveling to Japan and working in the U.S. as well, and other parts of Mexico, but still Mexico City, because of the Boxy Lucha Commission, they were not allowed to wrestle there. And one of the reasons why they were not allowed to wrestle there was because the head of the Boxy Lucha Commission was a man by the name of Rafael Barradas. And for those of you who do not know, Rafael Barradas, his daughter would eventually would get an office job within in the Boxy Lucha Commission, but she would also become a promoter. I think she became a promoter not for smaller shows. I'm not sure if in Mexico City, but in other parts of Mexico. I think she might have become a promoter more in Mexico in Monterrey than. I know she had an office job because that's where basically his daughter, whose name may have not been brought up, but his granddaughter is very well known, and this is where the connection is. His granddaughter is, of course, Estrellita, who would later become a luchadora, much to the disappointment of her grandfather, who was actually, she said that he was not pleased that she was a wrestler. But I mentioned this in a previous podcast where she did an interview, and she said that her grandfather wasn't very supportive of his daughter's decisions, because I think his daughter married or hooked up was in a relationship at a very young age, and he did not approve of it or something, and when it took years for him to finally help his daughter out, and at that point Estrellita and her I think she had a brother or a couple of other siblings, it was mostly because their mother couldn't support them, so she actually left them at an orphanage. And then she eventually came back and picked them up, and with help from her grandfather and stuff like that. he for many years refused to allow women to wrestle in Mexico City. And over the years, there were people who were like not just promoters, but wrestlers, the union, fans. Like you go through a lot of the Boxy Lucha magazines, there were so many fans constantly sending letters complaining about why in Mexico City women weren't allowed to wrestle. And it was basically Rafael Baradas would not allow it to happen because he didn't believe that women belonged in the wrestling ring. It happened sometime in 1984 or 1985. Baby Richard told the story about how because he was working for the Wrestlers Union at that time, and the Wrestlers Union was the one that actually who started because they had a lot of the women were part of that union, and they kind of wanted to wrestle in Mexico City, and a lot of the promoters got involved in it also. And it wasn't until Paco Alonso and EMLL got involved that they were able to kind of start forcing their point of view of having women back in the ring, on shows in Mexico City. And it actually ended up being where Rafael Baradas ended up losing this battle, and I think he retired after that. And it wasn't until I think 1986, late 1986, when women were allowed back into to wrestle in Mexico City. And a lot of people often ask why what some of the early years when I was online, we would constantly get asked what were some of the big matches in women's wrestling in Mexico City. And I think most of the time we would just mention stuff that happened in the 90s, and we would tell people wrestling in Mexico City was banned. And a lot of if you're going to get a lot of the footage of lucha libre from the 80s or 90s, the majority of it comes from Mexico City. So you're obviously not going to get a lot of women's wrestling from that time period. I think a lot of the stuff that you would get was whenever that was women wrestling in Mexico was usually the El Toreo stuff, when like Chigusa Nagayo, or they would have like an All Japan women's match, featuring La Galactica or Lola Gonzalez versus somebody from there. I think there's a couple of things that were from that made its way into the All Japan women's TV show. But yeah, that was like for the longest time. And the funny thing is like the same time period that women's wrestling was where they lifted the ban in Mexico City, the Boxy Lucha Commission from Mexico City decided that they wanted to put in a rule where wrestlers over the age of 35 would not be allowed to wrestle in Mexico, in Arena Mexico, or in a Coliseo. Obviously, that did not pass, but the reason that got brought up was because some of the early female wrestlers that finally got to work in Mexico City for the first time were actually women that were well past 35. And I think one of them, I think it was Chavela Romero and Irma Gonzalez were the ones that were brought up. But yeah, that was basically something that went on for a long time. Once the ban was lifted, we got to see a lot of the not only did we see a lot of the luchadoras, but also we got to see a lot of the foreigners make their way into Mexico City. Monster Ripper wrestled quite a bit on EMLL shows, and Chigusa Nagayo also wrestled. I think she wrestled an EMLL show in 1988. I think that made it onto All Japan Women's Television at one point also. So it's on one of the All Japan Women's Classic shows. But yeah, that ban went on for a long time. In the 90s, what happened was there really wasn't. I think a lot of the women were splitting their time because EMLL wasn't really pushing women's wrestling as much. There were basically, it was, I think for a lot of years it was like you had the Moreno sisters and you had Lady Apache, but then you wouldn't really see them that often. And usually you would have them wrestling like Akira Hokuto or Bull Nakano, people like that. But it wasn't that frequent. And then so they would go to AAA, and really Antonio Pena was the one that was more behind women's wrestling at that time. So you kind of had more women's wrestling there, or they would work independents, and that would give them more freedom to work with All Japan Women, and some of the later women's promotions from Japan that came along, like Arceon and stuff like Agaya and all that stuff. But yeah, there really wasn't a lot of stuff televised. Really, a lot of the women's wrestling that got televised more was like in the late 90s with AAA, when the Moreno sisters, and then Las Brujas, the Apache sisters, and all that later on came to be. And then like, CMLL finally got behind women's wrestling in the early I think it was 2004, 2005 and that was really mostly because of Dark Angel, Sarah Stock, and there was a lot of Marcela, Amapola, who were a lot better at than they were very good in the ring, so that kind of got that going. And so you really like most of the quality of women's wrestling at that time was really during that time period. Now you get a lot of women's wrestling, and I think right now the problem with women's wrestling is like there's a lot of women in wrestling in Mexico, but it's not really quality. It's more quantity, and quality. Unfortunately, it's more about the promoters. I think they see a pretty face or a pretty body, and they kind of like Demasiado said, they see that. Guys want to see that, and they kind of skip all the work rate and them being a lot better in the ring. Some of them end up improving, but some of them never really do. But like I said, that's that band. Yeah, that was like that's 30 years. There was that's a pretty amazing story. Like that's something that I'm sure it's gonna get pop up. There's gonna be more stories to it because like I said, every time I open a magazine, there's somebody complaining about it, or there's a little snippet about how they weren't allowed in Mexico City. And I know there's from going to the Cauliflower Alley Club convention in Las Vegas. There's been a lot of the older women who have talked about them working in Mexico, and in the 80s, and you think I don't remember them being wrestling in Mexico, but it's because they didn't work in Mexico City. They were wrestling in other parts of Mexico, the Juarez, Monterrey, places like that. So you really didn't get to see them at that time. So yeah, that's the first Lucha Clasica segment we'll be doing on these shows. Gonna try to add one every show. Hopefully every show, if not every couple of shows. I hope everybody enjoyed it. That's about it for this week. Again, be sure to visit the website at LuchaWorld.com. You can also support the site by signing up to the Patreon page at patreon.com/LuchaWorld. I should not forget the slash. I think I forgot the last time. Which features the Lucha Clasica podcast, Lucha Magazine write-ups, and some more stuff that will be coming up soon. You can also visit our sponsor, Amazon.com. If ordering something from them, click through the link on our site and they'll send us a few pesos every so often. It's more than pesos, but it isn't that much. But it helps. Every little bit helps. And it's always nice to it's always fun to randomly get an Amazon credit and be completely confused why I'm getting 10 or $11 suddenly from Amazon, because I don't even remember half the time that I signed up to their affiliate program, and it shows up, and I always have to figure out if maybe they canceled an order I made, but it turns out it's from the affiliate program. Like I said, every little bit helps keep the site running and keeps me fed, so I have the energy to do all these podcasts. So hope everyone enjoyed the show, and we will be back again soon.